of being a teacher, school is to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, and some of the other subjects. It's to teach a child they're going to learn, and they're going to learn how to think.
That's right.
That's education.
How to problem solve.
There we
Seeing
go.
different ways of looking at things.
There you go.
Different perspectives.
You are not there to persuade.
Correct.
Or unduly influence. And this hopefully will start to help board members begin to understand what they're going to see. For instance, what kind of self-esteem does it take to begin to presume that you know better than a parent?
Pedophilia didn't even cross my radar. Like, I didn't just start there and just think, you know, there are teachers who are causing this type of harm to our kids. They're trying, I was going to say the word groom. That seems to be quite a trigger for people. But to have this response is what led to digging in further and being like, why would these people have this response to this? This isn't a parents against teacher war. Like, many teachers are on this front, but they just have to say it quietly. Otherwise, they're going to be condemned for it or ostracized for it.
Working someone, manipulating, grooming. The word grooming simply means this. Little by little, I'm causing you to turn the volume down on your intuition. That's all it means. For those that are legitimate, are both protective of other people and very sensitive. Genuinely sensitive, and would never
want to do harm or
no. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you,
spaces.
Canada has one of the most legitimate transgender guys that I know.
Yeah, let's talk about that, and let's talk about, you know, working on children's intuition.
There you go.
And how and weaponizing their compassion.
The issue is this, ultimately for me. Do we take a low bar or a high bar approach to protecting kids? You, Mr. Therapist, you had better simply say yes. Don't you dare ask a hard question. Don't you ask a prodding kind of, don't you ask any kind of questions. You simply say yes or affirm them. Entire movement is causing mandated reporters to actually be dumbed down in their ability to adequately and meaningfully fulfill their first and primary responsibility, including our school board members. They are mandated reporters. And would you know grooming if you saw it? They will gain access to the kids by first working the adults. They are testing the resolve and the discernment of adults long before they begin to access the kids. The greatest gift you could ever hand to them is the trans movement. The board members need to understand this, that there are people that are working them right now to dumb down their intuition, to cause them to lower the bar of child protection rather than raise it. And
it kind of relates to what you were saying just before we started recording, and how I'm the first to reach out, and how you had mentioned, and correct me if I'm wrong, but out of all of your expertise, and you're probably one of, if not the most experienced in terms of understanding, you know, the sexual deviant mind, let's say, and that you haven't had, there's so much, the activists, all of the preaching that's going on about all of this, but they haven't reached out to figure out any of this through you and with your expertise.
Right.
Can you maybe share a little bit about that, but what role you play in this and the expertise that you hold?
Yeah. Excellent question. So put together churchprotect.org. So that was the first thing I felt compelled to do. Is in learning that the most sophisticated of predators will target churches, that really above all settings or venues or population, as it were, that's my greatest concern.
Mhm.
Very few people would know that because I'm always having to battle, it's called trans deception, but way above and beyond the issue of any overt deviance or the trans movement. My greatest concern are churches.
Yeah.
Because again, those are such easy targets for perpetrators. Look what's happened in the Catholic Church, but it's happened in every setting. Okay?
Well, I want to hear a little bit more. I want you to kind of elaborate a little bit more about who you've dealt with and the work that you've done there with sexual deviance. But I also want to steer this topic as it pertains to our school boards and how it pertains to, because there's a bigger thing happening, I believe, as well. But just bringing it back to what it looks like right now in our school boards, in society,
Right.
With the gender ideologies, with the books that are being put out, how the board is responding to it, and apparently how much support there is even within, the teachers and some parents. But I guess this is a Twitter thing. Maybe they're very active on Twitter to defend these things. And one of the excuses that will come in, I mean, I use the word excuses because I really don't know any other word to explain when something's highlighted, when something's brought forth that's so important, whether it be pedophilia in our schools, to make almost just to dismiss it as if like it's not that big of a problem. You just stated and admitted that it's a big problem in churches, and that's it is a major problem in churches, and probably more so in churches than in schools, correct?
I believe so.
Yes.
Or at least on par, because
Oh, okay.
the
And
volume, the volume of kids that are accessible. So it's probably, there's probably more perps in churches.
okay. And so one of the dismissals of bringing up awareness that, oh, there's, pedophiles in our schools, and we should be aware of this. We should be aware of how it starts. We should be aware of the signals and the signs, and making sure that the kids are actually safe in our schools. All of a sudden you're hearing, well, you should be spending your time somewhere else. Why don't you look in something that's actually real? Why don't you look at trafficking of children? Why don't you look at the churches? Why don't you anything else but
Right.
what I'm working on? Why
Right.
why wouldn't we be? Can you walk us through a little bit of the psychology of that?
Sure. Because I confront this, and not in a harsh way. I mean, of course, I have to deal with a lot of pushback, but what people don't know, because if they've gone on to any of my social media, I'm I'm very hard hitting. Really, the way to put it, I'm very straightforward, very matter of fact. I'm a little bit different in person, but that's because the context is different. But I'm very much aware that, because in a way I was there before working in the prison system, I probably would have been a little more circumspect, but I understand it. I had no clue. Okay? I was trained in a lot of the textbooks. If anybody's gone to college, we have somehow the topic oftentimes of sexual abuse will come up in different courses if somebody has taken any kinds of courses that relate to that. Yeah, also child abuse training, but most people have heard what I call urban legends, because you can't live in this day and age in our societies and not hear about child abuse, and therefore not hear about what research has shown about these guys. And so we've come to believe that perpetrators are few and far between. And somehow, if there's a perpetrator, unless he's a real freakish guy, that somehow something happened and they need compassion. And we have to take into account all interests, and we want to be compassionate. People want to be compassionate. And so that's sort of an overall mindset. Most people have been told that when a man offends, unless he's caught holding a knife to a child's throat, that the kind of man that offends, whether at school, so let's say a teacher, let's say a doctor, psychologist, any profession, pastor, you name the profession, And what we're going to hear is that somehow these men, what is later revealed is that it was a combination. They're depressed, so they ended up having a mental health issue, or they became depressed, or they lost their bearings, or what came over them. Or so we start to feel sympathetic towards them. Without knowing it, our sympathies start to shift away from the victims.
Mm.
We also then have been told that a lot of these men will disclose, some will, this narrative that deep down inside they've always been attracted to children. They just were inhibited to ever come out with it because they didn't want to be labeled or stigmatized, and that they themselves were abused. They had suppressed it. They had forgotten, and lo and behold, out came this urge. And so they found a child, or they were focusing on children at an age that they themselves were abused. And so it's this subconscious drive to work out their own trauma.
Now that's a myth, right? That was in one of your
Complete
myths.
myth.
Yeah.
It's a
Okay.
complete myth.
Yeah.
I'll be able to tell you why. Okay. But I went into the prison system believing all this stuff because I'd been told this.
Okay.
Um,
Because of the theory.
and because of what's in the literature.
Which brings us back to all these activists stating they know what's best, but they haven't even
That's
talked
right.
to people
That's
like
right.
you. And how would they talk to anybody like you if they're denying that pedophilia behavior is even a problem?
That's right. It's rare, and that these things really don't happen. And so they'll cherry pick research, and they will choose their researcher without thinking through, for instance, methodology.
Mm-hmm.
Because when it comes to the social sciences, you have one or two, you have objective science, well, that's science, put in a test tube, it's measurable and observable,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or you're dealing with human behavior. And depending upon what you're studying, in this case, we're thinking in terms of sex offending, not many people think through, and I wouldn't have, the importance of how is this research conducted? Because the information you're going to derive, you have one of two sources of information. You either have what are called static factors that you don't even need to interview somebody. You can just look at things that don't change. For instance, arrest record.
Okay.
How many times were they married? The age at which they offended. So things that are just black and white. Those are called static factors.
Mm-hmm.
Those don't change. Okay? And so they'll start to have actuarial tables and things like that. For instance, the static 99 that was derived out of Ontario is a very decent, it's a quick assessment.
Okay.
And they've looked at enough, just based on stats. And it's a pretty decent, Dr. Hansen was the one to kind of head that up, Carl Hansen. And it's a good, we used to use it in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, it still does. It's the most widely utilized risk assessment tool, but it's dangerously flawed when it comes to pedophiles, because it assumes, and when you look at the research on this particular piece, there's like 2 studies and they're flawed. Now, I didn't know that right? until we start to think. So the presumption is, with the static 99, that child offending is based upon 2 things, primarily one, which is level of hormones. Testosterone, high testosterone equates to an increased likelihood of offending. True. If you study the guys properly, that's a myth, because that is a misunderstanding of sexual deviance. And that's what the perps and perp apologists and those that are naive as far as researchers, that's what they put out there, and that's all a perpetrator needs. Because now I'm going to be able to play you, Jon Q public, or the average person out there, because you have no idea, the average person who has not studied this properly, the question is, where would you study this properly? But if you haven't studied it properly, you're going to, without knowing it, you project onto others what you yourself believe. That's right. From our own perspective. So for instance, I say this, that predators know us better than we know them because they once had a conscience. and they have dispensed with their conscience, and they really like it that way, because there's a lot of benefit if you can get to a point where you have no conscience. We say to ourselves, how could someone sleep at night if they do heinous things like that? That's because we don't understand it, because we wouldn't sleep well because we have a conscience. But quite frankly, someone without a conscience really does sleep very well. They're at peace. Now, I don't recommend arriving at that state where you sleep very well. Now, are they truly at peace? They're also tending to do some drugs and alcohol or whatnot, but that doesn't cause it. But you look at the Jeffrey Dahmers and the Ted Bundys, they weren't alcoholics, they weren't drug addicts. They could plan, they were methodical, they were systematic. They were very engaging, because nobody's going to go home or get in a car unless there's a certain degree of appeal. We call that impression management. So they can manage the impression that you have. That is part of the psychopathic mind. And so if someone offends a child, prior to reaching that point, they have morphed into the realm of psychopathy. Another person to listen to or read is James Fallon. Now, his claim to fame, and he's done a nice job. He's a neuropsychologist. He's out of UC Irvine, I believe. What's funny about him and how his claim to fame was he inadvertently scanned his own brain. Well, he scanned his own brain. So he worked in a lab, or he was part of a lab that did brain scans. And they used the lab for a number of purposes, but as he indicated, there was an ongoing study, among other things they had going on in that lab. So neuroimaging, they were scanning brains of people that had a history of, family history of Alzheimer's. So he volunteered himself, so did his wife, because there is a history of Alzheimer's. So his brain scan was going to go in the pile of brain scans of Alzheimer's patients that were in this study. His lab was also used for forensic purposes, scanning the brains of psychopaths, or for purposes of determining psychopathy, because you can see it on a brain scan. That's how objective the brain scan is now.
Right. You're saying don't even bother with a lie detector test. You
don't need to anymore. No, because that's why a lie detector test is not admissible, because the best psychopaths can fool the lie detector. Because the more psychopathic you are, you're either more reactive or you're much more calm. And because they're so good at impression management, they will tell you. That's why they have no problem taking lie detector tests.
Right.
Because they can beat that. If you don't have a
conscience, then why would you even think you're doing anything wrong?
Can you have a psychopath that is not a narcissist? You can't.
I don't think so.
You can't. It's redundant.
Yeah.
Because to feel as though you have the right to cross somebody's boundaries, you have to feel pretty self-entitled. Now, it doesn't mean your self-esteem is normal, but to begin to objectify someone, that means you believe you are the center of the universe and you have the right to determine right and wrong. And therefore, as a matter of fact, the more sophisticated you are, the less people will think you're narcissistic. They're just going to think you're really confident. You become a black hole kind of person. So to say that the dark triad is comprised of narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism is redundant. So it sounds cool, but the person that put it together hasn't studied psychopaths. So a psychopath is strategic and will use people and work people, and very pragmatic by nature, and they're narcissistic.
Right.
And now the quintad adds sadistic on top of it. That is a psychopath, but it doesn't mean they're overtly sadistic. The difference between, so the best way to understand it, think in terms of straight and narrow. Somebody gets off the straight and narrow, ego starts to grow, it starts to build like a snowball. And then a person will morph into a narcissist. The world revolves around them. It is therefore their taking, and they are entitled. So they become increasingly self-entitled. That's a narcissist. A sloppy narcissist, a simple narcissist, needs a mirror, and they need accolades. A smart narcissist is going somewhere. and they don't necessarily want people to catch on. So eventually they'll go into politics, they'll go into finance, they're going somewhere. They want to endear themselves to people. They're going to manipulate. It's not what you know, but who you know. So they're making their way up the corporate ladder. In order to do that, you have to begin to master the Dale Carnegie course, How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now you're becoming a master at sales. You're morphing. Now you're working people and they actually like it. They think you're wonderful. That's why you're going to become a pastor or a televangelist or whatever, right? You're going to go into a field where there's people. But as you start to work people, and this hopefully will start to help board members begin to understand what they're going to see. For instance, what kind of self-esteem does it take to begin to presume that you know better than a parent?
Board members and teachers, right? And a lot of these teachers are not parents. It's, I think we need to clarify too, because we got pretty deep into pedophilia. And I don't want this to be something like, oh, this is all it's pedophilia didn't even cross my radar. Like I didn't just start there and just think, there are teachers who are causing this type of harm to our kids. They're trying, I was going to say the word groom. That seems to be quite a trigger for people.
Yeah, I use the term, and hopefully this will be helpful, unduly influence.
Okay.
Okay.
Unduly or intentionally influencing.
But either way, you are unduly influencing something, somebody. Instead of being a teacher, school is to teach reading, writing, and arithmetic, and some of the other subjects. It's to teach a child, they're going to learn, and they're going to learn how to think.
That's right.
That's education.
How to problem solve.
There we go.
Different ways of looking at things.
There we go.
Different perspectives.
You are not there to persuade.
Correct.
Or unduly influence.
So what?
Somebody else's child.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially in terms of moral values.
Right. And I think what I think people really need to start understanding is that, because so quickly it's dismissed as, like, as soon as you hear the word pedophile, Pierre Barnes has done so much great work in this. And I'm sure it didn't start there either. He saw a book that was like, whoa, this isn't cool. I don't want my kids seeing this. You bring it to the board. And if they continue to ignore you, they start to vilify you. They defend this material as if, and then start using the argument that it's necessary for kids' growth and education. Then you start to wonder, this is really bizarre. Why would they be? Wouldn't it just be a normal response to say, hey, I'm not okay with this content. Oh, why are you not okay with it? This is why. And you can have a discussion about it. If the parent was wrong in some sense, then have that conversation, help them understand why it could be necessary, why it could be useful, come to some sort of negotiation that it works for the stakeholders and the children, right? And whatever's best for the kids. But to have this response is what led to digging in further and being like, why would these people have this response to this? Bringing up this this particular book. Let's bring up, well, there's several, and I know that you've done some work in that area too, so I think you know what I'm referring to. But there's so many books that there just don't seem. And again, I can't state this. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a psychologist. I can't say if it's deemed necessary. And I hope that we have some time to go through one of, I don't know if you got the passage that I sent you, but I can pull it up on the screen if you
could, that would be great. We'll go through it.
And to just dismiss it. I would think, I work a lot with mind state, not in a psychological realm, but more of just mind state and behavior change for my clients for well-being, and more of how it aligns with what do they want for their well-being. Therefore, what does it look like that we need to do in order to align with that? What are the actions that we need to do to align with that? How can we do that on a more regular basis most of the time? And so I do a lot of behavior and sustainable behavior change. And so I'm fascinated by it. And so when I get responses like, whoa, I didn't know about, how prevalent pedophiles are at schools. When we looked at the material and we're like, whoa, this is a means of being able to facilitate, to make things a little bit easier for those who want to.
Right, we're now hesitant to use the term grooming, but that's actually a technical term in sex
Right.
offender
And so, not to say,
treatment.
and no one said all the teachers are doing this. This is the agenda of all the teachers in the school board. This is,
Right.
it's happening. I would think that any teacher, any person who has the children's best interest at heart would take that information and be like, whoa, I didn't know this. Yeah, we might have to look at this. Are there people at our schools doing this? Instead of being defensive as if they're talking to them, as if they're being accused of something, and that we're accusing all teachers. This isn't a parents against teacher war.
Yeah.
Like, many teachers are on this front, but they just have to say it quietly. Otherwise, they're going to be condemned for it or ostracized for it. But I mean, I would say, so I want you to talk a little bit about this, because I would think that a natural response would be either, whoa, I'm surprised by this. Is this true? Let's look into it. How can we make sure that this isn't happening or will happen in our schools? And are these books leading to some of that, and looking into a little bit more of why these books are there, and the purpose of them. And then my mind goes to, well, if there's somebody who's actually a predator or a sexual deviant, wouldn't they know better than wouldn't it be outing them if they stuff like went and defended this? So part of me is very much, I just have this cognitive dissonance of it, because it's like, well, if you really cared about the kids, then wouldn't you want to look into it? But if you are a pedophile, or could be, or leading up to, because I saw those stages, right? You don't just wake up and become a pedophile. There's like several stages that happen before that happens. So, I mean, if this is something that could be within you at some point, if you can proceed in the trajectory that you're in, then wouldn't you, and this kind of brought me back to the myths list of your website, because maybe you wouldn't necessarily think that it would out you, because you don't even think that there's anything to out.
There we go. There we go. Let me add the last stage, and then I'll speak to probably the wide array or range of mindsets or perspectives
Yeah.
that are sitting on a school board. Heading downhill, we talked about narcissism, sociopathy. The last stage is psychopathy. Now, again, the best way to understand a sociopath is someone who is really good at sales. But here's the distinguishing characteristic. A sociopath will refrain or restrain himself. He will stop working someone, manipulating them, grooming. The word grooming simply means this. Little by little, I'm causing you to turn the volume down on your intuition. That's all it means. I can financially groom you, and I'm bleeding you dry. You don't even know I'm emptying your bank account, or I'm putting a lot of money on your credit card. Or you're entrusting me with your retirement. Look at Bernie Madoff of the NASDAQ. He made off with everybody's money. So he's certainly a sociopath. A sociopath doesn't care about the other person that they're using, because they have no conscience by that time. The difference between a sociopath and a psychopath is the extent to which they will or will not stop. So a sociopath will stop. They'll put the brakes on when the cost outweighs the benefit, and they'll move on without a fight. So what I want people to understand is, by the time somebody becomes a sexual predator, a pedophile, they've morphed into a psychopath. So they already have a degree of assertiveness and boldness and self-confidence to lie to your face. They can look you in the eye. Why? Because they have good self-esteem. Now, it's warped and whacked out, but they feel entitled, and so they can come across very confident. That's a narcissist. Now, you're a means to an end, because they're a sociopath. They've morphed through sociopathy. They're great at sales.
What does that look like practically, though? Like, I mean, I'm trying to relate it to kind of what we're dealing with now. How about something more subtle? So something I notice with a lot of these conversations I have with individuals who are really pushing this and really defending it hard. They state everything as fact. They don't take ownership or accountability for their own consciousness. They don't say,
Correct.
I look at it this way, or I believe this, or I think this. It's always factual.
Right, because they employ that is what I call the big lie theory. It coincides with that. The big lie theory is I phrase it as that. The further down that continuum, sociopathy into psychopathy, you're learning the art of mental and emotional manipulation. So you will manufacture things and you will state them like facts with such a confidence that it will shake someone who is normal. Why? Because those of us that are normal would never state something as fact if we knew it wasn't, if we had any doubts, we couldn't. How?
Someone
Why?
who is not narcissistic doesn't think that way. They're like,
Okay.
wait, if I'm the only person, then maybe I have this wrong. If I am
Okay,
the
there
only
you
person
go.
who feels
There you
this
go.
way, that's right.
That's right. And because we believe it's important to tell the truth. And if we're not sure of something, we're not going to say it's fact because we don't necessarily know, because we need to have integrity. And a sociopath and a psychopath, they don't have what? No, they don't have integrity. We project onto them. That's why perpetrators, manipulators, sociopath, psychopath, cult leaders, whatever term you want to use, they know us better than we know them because they once had a conscience, so they can work us. They use our conscience, our morals, our ethics, our values against us because we know that we would never want to be accused of something we weren't doing. So number one, we won't want to go there. We won't allow ourselves to risk believing that someone's actually intending to manipulate, because we would never do that because we couldn't live with ourselves. Why? Because we have a conscience. So we project onto everyone that everybody has a conscience. We project onto everyone that they have empathy because we have empathy. We project onto other people the best of intentions because we have the best of intentions. So we're going to give the person the benefit of the doubt. I'm empowering a predator without knowing it. I'm going to get past your little boundaries because I want into, for instance, for this discussion, the private spaces of women and children.
Well,
Now,
and let's talk about let's talk about that. And let's talk about, working on children's intuition
there you go.
and how, and weaponizing their compassion and that
That's
moral ground of, one of our parents shared a story about her daughter being in the bathroom and a boy walked in and she said, I think you have the wrong washroom. And he said, oh no, I identify as a woman. And she has a parent that is transgender. So she, would know about this stuff more than most. And so she felt so horrible. Like she thought she hurt, like she was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed that I said anything. I should have known better. Meanwhile, her intuition was telling her something. This person was very manly appearance. It wasn't like they had a lot of facial hair. It wasn't like someone who, oh, are you a girl or are you a boy? Like, I can't really tell. Like, it was clearly a male coming in. And we have these intuition. It must have been like 40 minutes long. We set up this tent event here in Waterloo where we had some of the blow up pictures of some of the pictures that were in the books that are in our school. And parents would have to come into the tent to see the material. And, this academic didn't want to come say, oh, I know what you guys are doing. You don't know what you're doing. You don't know what you're talking about. This information is important for the kids. You're doing harm kind of mentality.
They're
Finally
flipping the
comes
script, by the way.
over.
That's
What's
one of
that?
the technique. It's called flipping the script.
Okay. And she ended up coming with a partner to come check it out. Say, okay, let's just see what you have here. And the discussion I had with her, like it just kept going back to these excuses and these lines that her line was important. Like where she would draw the line is reasonable, but where someone else would draw the line is not reasonable because she would draw her line much further down the road. And we talked about bathrooms and it just comes back to unfalsifiable arguments, like, because it comes from more than just facts. Like it's intuition, it's instinct, it's moral grounds that I can't argue with someone who doesn't have any morals. Like, if you don't think something's wrong and I think it's wrong morally, I can't really have that argument with you because it's on moral grounds, you know? And so for them to come back and say, why does that like make you so upset? Why would it make women upset to have men using their bathroom anyways? It's like, well, why do we do the things we do? Like, and why is it that women are upset by it? And why is it that the women who are upset by it because it's their safe space, but yet that's just a facade, that's not real, that's not real, because that's why we should let men start using the bathroom, but yet they're using the bathroom because the male washroom is not a safe space for them. The hypocrisy of it is unreal.
Yeah, and they will try to get people off of their center square. The issue is this, ultimately for me. Do we take a low bar or a high bar approach to protecting kids?
Always high bar.
Okay, bottom
Right?
line, right? That's the question I have for anyone. And when it's framed in that way, it's not fancy footwork that I'm doing. That's really what this is all about. And I'll continue now to make the case for this, which is this. Without sexual deviance, without pornography, its influence, and those using it to groom, to unduly influence, but what is that? That's on corrupting the morals. Matter of fact, if any of these books were found on the person of any of the men in my sex offender treatment groups, I have 3 right now, meaning 3 groups, up to about 45 guys. So I worked with sex offenders in prison and out for going on about 14 years. Okay. If any of the men in my groups were found in possession of any of these books, they would be violated out of group, and they would be sent back to prison, because these groups contain the exact material that they would use to groom kids.
So, and we kind of talked about this the last time. So just to clarify, it doesn't need to be graphics. It could be just graphic text. It can be very
correct. Because what would they do with the books with the kid? They're going to spend time, they're going to read a story, because who doesn't want to have a story read to them? And these concepts might be a little much for a 6-year-old. So the 6-year-old is going to do what? Either ask a question, or I've just read about a big erect inserted into somebody's. Oh, do you know what an anal is? Oh, here. Well, let me describe. As a matter of fact, I could show you, and because we want you to be. So if all the inclusivity, undue influence is successful in schools, and now I'll speak to a board member for a moment here, and then we'll go on to describe the mindset of predators. If you are successful in, quote unquote, affirming all these kids, I'll tell you what you've just done for them. You've made it very appealing eventually to get on a moving sidewalk called the trans movement. Where does this moving sidewalk go? Because you're going to help usher them onto the conveyor belt of inclusivity. If they stay on that long enough, they're going to start taking puberty blockers. That's where this goes, because we've told them they're born in the wrong body. And so what they once thought was true with their left brain isn't true. I guess biology 101 doesn't mean what it means. XXXY no longer means that. So now we dispense with reality testing, fact-based, and then the perpetrators, the manipulators, they're going to go after the intuition, the right brain, which will be, well, I know what it looks like, but it's really not that. So now I'm dispensing with the child's intuition, which is their only source of reality testing, without enough information that has to do with intentions. So I had better have my intuition available to me if some sweet talking guy comes along smiling at me. Does he come with best of intentions? I'd better know that, because we already talked about sociopaths, right? They may sell me a bridge to nowhere. They may have something else in mind. I may be a means to an end to them. They're objectifying me.
And let's
So
remind people what that looks like too. Like, oh, let's not be rude to strangers. There's no need to be afraid of strangers.
there used to be stranger danger. That's right. Now there's no threat anywhere in the world. Really.
As an adult, I don't need to worry about my feelings being hurt about some kid saying stranger danger to me. Like, I'm not hurt by that. I'm very glad that that kid is staying
Yeah.
safe. I think
Yeah.
the only people who would be offended by that are people who have some sort of agenda.
Are the strangers. That's
The
right.
dangerous stranger.
You know what? That's like us saying this. You know what? We all have to remove locks from our doors. Because you know what? That is not inclusive.
No.
That does not send a good message. So if you pull up next to on a street corner and you see some guy and you get this really weird feeling, how many women, understandably, or people, parents, have just hit the door lock button just to be safe? Well, look at how biased and prejudiced we are. Or maybe we've seen too many examples where before you know it, somebody's opening the car door and getting in. Boundaries are what will inevitably be chipped away at and overcome. That's that grooming process. The trans movement ultimately is a moving sidewalk. It's a conveyor belt. Wherever a child enters into, the longer they stay on there. So again, questioning gender, questioning sex, whatever term you want to use. So XXXY no longer means that. Born in the wrong body. So now we're moving further. You're going to start to see a progression. There's going to be a social change. We're now going to start to change our name. We're going to use pronouns. What once our name is now dead. Now we're actually morphing into a different person. And by that time, my parents, you know what? My estimation of my parents is slowly decreasing. Now I start to, at the very least, I think they're stupid, a little slow, a little backward. They just don't get it. As a matter of fact, now I almost want to know how long they've been hating trans people, and they want them dead. As a matter of fact, I'm beginning to think that my parents really secretly were there not just to hold me back, but they're filled with hate. See what I'm doing? Every cultic movement has to separate parents from their children by drawing children away from the parents, creating an us versus them mentality. They will have different language. They will have different speak. It used to be new speak in the book 1984, right? If you control the language, you control the thought process. Yeah. For instance, they will have the trans movement has all sorts of language, which is disingenuous. Because it's to take the edge off. It's to blur reality. So we're not going to use factual terms, including double mastectomy and castration. We will just use the terms top surgery and bottom surgery.
Right. Well, it also takes the true meaning. It takes away from the true meaning of what's going on too.
Because now we can't assess properly. And if you can't
make an informed decision.
100%. So we're ensuring these kids cannot make an informed decision, therefore cannot give actual consent. By nature, the trans movement is the trans deception because it is predicated upon withholding fact-based information to kids. What is one thing that,
I was going to say, yet one of the core arguments of, the diversity or the racial ideology aspect of this, of being able to know the history. Those of us who say this is a theory, this is ideology, this isn't fact. Not all whites are racist, not like this. These are not concepts that are helpful to our students. Those very same people who argue that we need this accuse us, and even the people who say, like the ones for those of us who want some of these books out of our schools or not accessible to certain age groups or whatever, will say, why don't you want your kids to know real life? Why don't you want your kids to know the truth about history, about how life is. Yet they're the very same people who refuse to give complete informed consent
That's right.
about these things. Why don't we have pictures of our top surgeries and bottom
There we
surgeries and
go.
all the things that can go wrong with those things, and how they're on medication? We can go on and on and on about all of the things that are not that appealing, that only someone who has incredible, gender dysmorphia, so
Mhm.
much so that despite all of the hardship
Yeah.
that's going to come, knowing all of the hardship that's going to come from it, I'll still do it.
Well, and in that case, the person you just described, that's pretty much a sexual abuse survivor. That I can guarantee you, Christina. The kid,
Really?
oh, 100%. Because my background has worked with kids in the system, severely emotionally disturbed kids. I can tell you, you're dealing with a kid that has been sucked into a cult. If they can look at pictures of a female body that has had both breasts chopped off, or a male that's been castrated, and thinking that's a beneficial thing, thinking that the more skin in the game they have, that the more they get body parts chopped off, the more whole they are becoming. A cult has their mind. The only person, the kind that are susceptible, most susceptible to, because that means their intuition's gone. They've turned their intuition down. So they're very moldable and malleable. They're under the power of suggestion. To tell a kid that the answer to their emotional distress, which is severe mental illness, by the way, and there are 9 key red flag clinical indicators of sexual trauma, all of which you will find in that type of child, for the vast majority. You'll oftentimes find self-injurious behavior, cutting. What is cutting indicative of? The more severe kind, and you can tell the difference between superficial versus severe. It's that happens in a dissociative state. For those that want to push the trans deception, can you tell me what a dissociative state is? What happens within? I can tell you. Do you know how that happens? Do you know that in a dissociative state, there will be parts, some of which will be the opposite sex? So a girl that says, I don't want to be a girl, I want to be a boy. The very first thing that should go through anybody's mind is what? I'll tell you, they're being sexually perped on. Why? Because in their mind, if they weren't a girl, it wouldn't be happening. But we've now taken the red flag key clinical indicators of sexual trauma, and we've reframed it in terms of gender confusion. And so off to the gender specialist, meaning the doctor that's going to put them on chemicals that will castrate them and then eventually amputate them. We don't ask questions, because why? Because now they're a part of the family, the community, and anything that will dissuade them to begin to think about their own self and their own best interest and their own future, where they might step away from the community, is converting them away from the new family. So you hear of conversion therapy. Cults invert and flip language. It's now their child. Don't you dare take our child away because you're converting our child. You, Mr. Therapist, you had better simply say yes. Don't you dare ask a hard question. Don't you ask a prodding kind of, don't you ask any kind of questions. You simply say yes or affirm them.
Yeah.
Affirming a child that says, I'm born in the wrong body, clinically is affirming a delusion. That does not help self-esteem, and that does not help.
When would we ever do
wounds.
that any other time?
It never happens. As a matter of fact, psychology used to, for all the eons, or the decades that psychology has been along, it's all been about building self-esteem. And how you do that is you help someone with their competencies. You don't fill their mind with inadequacies and then tell them how we're going to help you with your self-esteem. Is we're going to help you seek to eradicate yourself and morph into something you're not, that has to be maintained by artificial means by big pharma for life.
Someone explained it as like your body is going to fight it, like
because your body wants to heal. Your body wants to heal. For boys, they talk in terms of dilation 3 times a day. For how many years? Forever. What are they dilating? They're dilating a wound.
Yeah.
That's what it's a cavern. Somebody's drilled a fake vagina in them. No, they have an open wound that now what's going to happen? Tell you what, we're setting these kids up for horrific abuse. And that's the other part as far as the predators. So you will have financial and sexual predators that are having a heyday targeting these kids because none of whom, as far as the predators, financial or sexual, have any morals. And the definition of psychopathy is this: you've entered into a realm where you have no conscience, and therefore you have no remorse. You're not sorry, and you have no empathy. You don't care the effect. And again, predators know us better than we know them, and they know we have a conscience. So they know that we would never purposely manipulate someone into something that's not going to be beneficial, but that's because we have a conscience. Here's the important things with sexual psychopathy, so you can understand what's happening as far as the books and all.
Yes, relate it back to the books.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, for those of you, if you're listening to me and you're on a school board, here's probably the wide range of perspectives on a school board as well. I'm not really sure what this thing is. I've heard about this trans thing, and it seems like, I don't know, rainbows and pixie dust and unicorns, and they seem okay. Little kids walking around with cat ears and cat tails, and guys did drag queen, the sensitivity. So I don't know, it's a fad. Okay, that's one perspective. The other is, well, you know what? I've heard that there's these groups that do not feel included, and that apparently there's actual trans kids. So you know what? We need to watch out for their self-esteem. We want to help protect these trans kids. Science has now found that this is a thing. So we're here for kids, and I want to be able to we need to have every kid feel included. Okay, that's going to be one perspective. Another perspective. The other is, well, of course, there's trans kids, and you know what? Some of these kids may really be born in the wrong body. So who are we to inhibit that? As a matter of fact, we're actually doing harm, lifelong harm, because this girl may be a boy, and so we have to really make sure that she feels included and give her what she needs. And there are these safe spaces, and also these after-school clubs. And these groups, they're so selfless. They're willing to come in, and they're talking about career options, including OnlyFans. And you know what? It may not be that prostitution's for everybody, but that may be a reasonable line of work. Okay? That's another thing. Each one of these, I'm a sitting duck for a predator, aren't I? I'm facilitating a predator's long-term game plan. The other is, you know what? Whether I've ever told anybody or not, my family members, I've got somebody that's trans, and I don't know, and even my kid, and I just, because it's so difficult, or maybe I've thought about transition, I think we really need to support these kids. Think about how much energy I'm now becoming an activist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's another one. Another kind of person who will probably be a little more reserved, but it's going to be a little more strategic in terms of the questions they ask. And the kind of the pushback is someone that has a stake in this, a financial stake, maybe. They know someone that knows someone. Karen Bondar of the Chilliwack School Board.
Mm-hmm.
She started with the film series.
She's the chair. Is she the chair?
I don't know what she is now, but I tell you what, if you go on my website, I'm sorry, if you go on my YouTube, Karen used to put out the most deviant of biology lessons, that after a kid watches these, I defy anybody to adequately test that child if he or she walks away with a good fund of knowledge of biology. Or are they going to remember this guy in a Speedo that's getting somewhat erect as he's getting his pelvis close to Karen, as they're talking about invertebrates, and they're kind of bumping and grinding. Okay, or as she's swinging in her underwear on a wrecking ball and mouthing as though she's giving oral sex to a microphone. And she takes issue with.
She showed this in her classrooms?
No, this has been online.
Okay.
So we got videos of all this.
Okay.
But this is who she was and is.
Yeah. Right.
Wild sex. Oh, that was the title of it. So wild sex. So are we surprised that when she gets on the school board, what do you think she's really in favor of? Oh, yeah. All the deviant sex ed stuff. Now, has anybody ever really looked at what's on Karen Bondar's electronics, online activities, financial records, or her phone GPS? I haven't, but the question is this: do you know what she does at night? Do you know who she interacts with? Why is a woman so uniquely interested in BDSM and now being on the school board? Oh,
I don't know
could
what
it be
BDSM is.
bondage and
Oh,
sadomasochism?
yeah.
Kink,
Okay.
50 Shades of Grey.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Then we have those that are actually supporting the curriculum and maybe even producing the curriculum. What's the
Mm-hmm.
curriculum? Well, inevitably it's going to have, and the school board members need to understand this. The Centera out in Ohio was a major publishing company that was going into schools, Centera. And I spoke to this about this organization. So it was whatever they labeled in all sorts of stuff. Inclusivity is education. It was going to be all things wonderful and kumbaya. So they're bringing in all the classic trans movement material, all this sexual deviant stuff. Little did parents know, though, that in the classroom, the kids were being provided material with embedded links.
Mm-hmm. Some of
These links.
some of these books have the links in
Oh,
there.
yeah. Okay. Well, I show on a video that I did with another pro reasonable sex ed material, the actual links. And so we click on these and off they go to X-rated video houses and bondage films, all sorts of stuff. So the question is, why do they have such links? And according to child abuse reporting law, if you present certain kinds of material to a child, you have actually now broken the law.
Mm-hmm.
And the teacher is required as a mandated reporter to report you, or so as an administrator. So the entire movement is causing mandated reporters to actually be dumbed down in their ability to adequately and meaningfully fulfill their first and primary responsibility, including so are school board members. They are mandated reporters. And would you know grooming if you saw it? Or
Do they even want to be educated on that?
Right. And I can tell you the material that is being shown to kids is grooming material.
I would really love, Jon, if you would so graciously give me a little bit more of your time to go through like some actual books and just go through the psyche of it. Why, and maybe even, coming up with some steelman arguments, but based on what how is this actually serving? Like, oh, well, it could be serving because of this. Or maybe we don't need to go there, but to really capture what's going on with these books. What does it lead to?
That's right.
Why would we
I
even
think
need
that would
it?
be wonderful. Let's plan
And
on that. Let's plan on
okay,
kind of another part to this,
yeah,
because I think that'll be very helpful, because my heart goes out to the majority of school board members, right? They're just trying to do the right thing, and they're hearing all these different arguments, but very few are hearing the dangers of
that's
this.
right. That's right.
And so I
I
really
should
want to
send
share
you
with
my
them.
last, I want to share my last delegation with
Yeah,
you.
the piece that I haven't shared, and really
Okay.
it'll then set the stage for what we're going to talk about, is let me describe what psychopathy is and therefore sexual deviance. Okay, psychopathy, when somebody morphs from narcissism into sociopathy into psychopathy, what's happened is this: where a sociopath will stop when the cost outweighs the benefit, a psychopath continues, meaning now he's going to morph into, the goal becomes different as selfishness morphs, as conscience is violated. There starts to change within the heart and the mind and the soul of a person, where it's no longer about benefit, it's about effect.
Okay. I was going to say control.
Person starts to morph into someone that is driven to have a negative effect. That is very important, because you can match the kind of crimes that people do based upon whether they're sociopaths or psychopaths. The sociopath is not about having a negative effect. They're about benefiting themselves. But they're not interested in leaving the other person in pain or having a significant impact that will significantly, meaningfully change the course of someone else's life. That's not what a sociopath is about. But a psychopath is driven to have the last word, last say, last laugh, and to have a negative effect, to leave a lasting effect, which will be a negative effect. When somebody is morphed into that, they are now driven to not just get over on someone, but to have their way with someone. If they're a financial psychopath, they don't care about getting rich. Think about the mega rich that now are in positions of influence. Once you have multiple billions of dollars, you lose, it means nothing. That's when they start to be very interested in changing societies, changing the way things are, to mold things in there, right? They're now going to have a significant impact. You layer that with sexuality, and now you have entered into what's called sexual deviance. People need to understand this. It took me years of working with sex offenders to understand. And when I did, my eyes were open and now everything makes sense. As a matter of fact, the majority of sex offender treatment providers, I'm convinced, could not define what is sexual deviance. They could not tell you what I'm going to tell you right now because they haven't worked with the guys in the right way, which is number one, intensively, and number two, in a way that's going to cause them to divulge. So the process of becoming a sexual deviant is this. It starts with attraction, and think of starting to go down the slippery slope. Everybody's attracted. Once it becomes self-ish, it's now moved into lust. Lust now starts minor, starts to move, and you will start to see it will parallel, or my pornography will start to parallel what's happening to me on the inside, these stages. Now, the issue again is deviance. There's always been deviance. Ever since porn and the internet, the process of deviance has been supercharged. And therefore, in this day and age, probably since the 1970s, quite frankly, certainly the 80s, definitely the 90s, the one common denominator among all sex offenses is pornography. You will not find in this day and age any sex offense that is devoid of the influence of pornography. 100% of sex offenders are deeply steeped in years worth of progressive pornography prior to ever perpetrating. And 100% of child offenders are busted with child rape porn. 98 to 99% are also charged with the dissemination or distribution. And virtually all of them also have found among all the images and the videotapes and video recordings, bestiality. There we go. Okay, and that's so I found that there are eight stages, 8 categories of sex offenders. This is my work. Okay.
Yeah.
So what we're talking about is, as this moves down, you can see the moral disposition. Everything changes. So you look at the pedophile. So by the time you have a sexual predator, it's not as bad as a pedophile, not as bad as a sexually violent predator. And then the worst is what? And I will tell you this. The greatest gift you could give those on the further right and all the way down to the farthest right, the greatest gift you could ever hand to them is the trans movement.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right?
Because these are the ones that are the wolves in sheep's clothing, because for them, it's the thrill of the hunt, which is half the fun. And they will gain access to the kids by first working the adults. They are testing the resolve and the discernment of adults long before they begin to access the kids. And so they will test resolve, they will test boundaries. And if the parents, if the adults, if the protective adults begin to have their own intuition dumbed it down, then the door is wide open for the wolf to access the sheep. And because by the time you go to the right, you are either very reactive and you're the creepy guy in the park, stranger danger, or you're the kind that is the Larry Nassar on the Olympic team for the US female Olympic team, that you've been perpetrating for years and no one suspected because you knew how to manage their impressions, and you were in a position that's a mandated reporter position, by the way, that you knew how to manipulate because you had the skills of a cult leader, that you mastered the art of the skills that were employed by the sex cult NXIVM, by Keith Raniere and Allison Mack, and Scientology. Those two combined employ the most sophisticated of cult-like techniques of mental and emotional manipulation. The thing about a deviant is this: it's the thrill of the hunt and it's game theory. It's working it, but they are driven. So by the time somebody becomes a pedophile, by the time somebody becomes a sexual predator, a sexual deviant, they are driven to scar and mar and have a lasting effect upon the heart and soul and future of a child. They are not content to stay where they are in drag clubs or wherever they're going to be. Why? Because it's not as much fun. They're driven to cross boundaries continually and have the greatest pool of potential targets of opportunity, which would be schools. All it takes is one or two or three in the midst of a school. It really only takes one, because they all have buddies. They're part of a network in one way or another. There's never a lone wolf. And they're testing. So if you're going to test the resolve of community, meaning to find out, are they clueless? Are they brain dead? Or do they kind of have a sense? Do they still have their intuition? So I'll tell you what, me and my deviant buddies, if I'm a perpetrator, tell you what we're going to do. We're going to dress in women's underwear and drag, and we're going to come read to your kids. You think it's story time. We're just testing out.
Listen,
and if it's
John,
successful,
I know you need to go. I know you have an appointment, but we'll have to talk more about this chart in terms of this not necessarily being conviction too, right? Like, these people aren't necessarily convicted of
the vast majority.
Just because you're not convicted doesn't mean you're not on the range of this sex offender.
No, and the question is this: by the time of, look at the far right, pedophilic sexual violent predator. By the time he's busted, which category was he in? The far right. How long did it take him to get there? A lot of years. How much porn did he consume? A lot of years worth. How many victims does he have by the time he's finally discovered? Many, sometimes hundreds.
Yeah.
How many years was he perping? Years. So by the time he's busted, he's been doing this for years. That's what people need to understand. They are very calculating and methodical, and they are all about working, softening the target. It's all carpet bombing, like a B-52 that would drop all those bombs. The board members need to understand this, that there are people that are working them right now to dumb down their intuition, to cause them to lower the bar of child protection rather than raise it. And you want to find out who, and you want to find out who a potential predator or predator apologist is? You pass a motion to begin raising the bar, get deviant material out of your schools. You start to pass a motion and you watch who starts to protest. And somehow they're either a predator or a predator apologist. Simple as that. What I say is this: protective adults raise the bar. When it comes to child safety, we never lower it.
I love it. Okay, and so next time we'll make a connection with all of this to the books and maybe the surveys.
There we go. Absolutely.
Thank you so much for your time, John.
You're more than welcome.
I appreciate you so much.
Well, I appreciate your dedication to the safety of women and children.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christine.